Well, wonderful, Amber, and welcome to our UX conversations. And it's good to have you here, although it's so early on your side, isn't it?
It is. It's about a little after 7 a.m. The sun is still coming up.
Oh, and where you're at? You're not on the East Coast at the moment, right?
No, at the moment I'm in Arizona, so a little warmer.
Ah, nice. So it's great to have you here, and thanks for being with us for this series of talks that we do with personalities who work in design and UX, and of course, including our UX Design Awards jury members. And we invite you and different members of our community to share insights about the work and personal development with our UX Design Awards community. My name is Arke Rudolph, Director of the UX Design Awards and Head of Strategy at International Design Center Berlin. We're the organization behind the awards. I'm very glad to kick off our first episode of our new series with a very special guest. Amber Lundy. She's a senior designer focusing on machine learning, UX, and AI-driven experiences. Her professional career spans many different spaces and fields, from industrial design and computer-mediated communications to UX and transmedia art, actually. And over the years, she has led design and product development teams at startups and big tech giants, such as Emotion Analytics, Raytheon WebSense, Apple, and Amazon. As a senior designer for strategy for futures. That was her last description. And that's an interesting job title, but I think we'll get later to that. So Amber, for starters, let me ask you, how did you get into the design field? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how your journey began.
Yes, I think my journey began quite early. I feel like I was kind of born into the right place at the right time. My family has a very extensive history in engineering and the arts and craftsmanship that goes back a long ways. So they've always been keen on that. I was surrounded by it growing up. And when I was young and going through school, I was a special education student and given a lot of supplemental art classes to learn how to really communicate with the people around me and understand my surroundings a bit more. So that was almost the best training I could have got to become a designer, was supplementing science with art or humanities with art. And it really kind of started from there. But fast forward to when I got a little older, I had relocated to the United States and didn't quite understand the culture as well as some of the other countries I'd lived in. And I went online and got very into computers and computer security and telephony to figure out how to reconnect with my friends all over the world. Got into a slight bit of trouble there and ended up talking to a judge at some point. He gave me a very stern conversation about using my curiosity for something good. And that's when I found design, and specifically industrial design, because I figured I could get my hands in devices and still work in that space without being elbows deep in code all the time. So I started in industrial design, but kept making products with interfaces. So my professors nudged me towards this thing called UX, and I went out and got my first UX design internship, and my career just kind of took off from there. I stayed with it, and it's been a pretty crazy ride so far.
You said that it took off like a rocket. So is there one thing you can say that helped you, or maybe most importantly, not the one thing, but maybe persons?
Yes, I think there were definitely some very key individuals throughout my early journey who helped foster my ongoing curiosity for this particular path in design. I had some very great managers early on. I think my first UX internship, fortunately, I joined a team that was well-staffed and they had a very good methodology in place for a really complex product space. So I learned a ton of process and methodology in that role. And that set me up quite well to move forward. And then a few very key managers that were extremely supportive and pushed me in just the right ways in different roles.
And that was what kind of job?
The initial job was my internship at Raytheon WebSense. That was working on computer security and cybersecurity intelligence, productizing that. I think my next probably pivotal experience with a leader who really pushed me was at InMotion Analytics when we were working on sentiment analysis classifiers early on, before everybody was doing it, and it was still kind of this emerging field, and it was really hard to find examples of work, but it was super interesting and exploratory, and I had a lot of freedom and support from different leaders within that organization. And then when I had moved on to Amazon, there's been a number of key managers that have really allowed me to work on big initiatives that had big impact. And they helped me with some of my, what would you call it? Imposter syndrome, probably. They helped me through that.
Imposter syndrome, in saying
Yes.
that you would say that maybe you didn't know exactly what you were doing at that position or that field. Was this about?
Yes.
Because, I mean, your last role was about advanced design, right? Wasn't
Yes.
it? So
Yes.
you worked at the futures design team. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what you did in terms of advanced design concept development.
Yeah.
Because it's something that is a little bit vague maybe for some people, but it's hugely fascinating.
Yes, I feel like I finally arrived in roles that started doing advanced concept design in the future after I had gone through all of those roles launching for so long. It took me all of that methodology to really feel confident in doing the advanced design. But the advanced concept design and futures design is a really interesting space where you actually look far out in the future, and you could take a new emerging customer need or a social movement, and you want to extrapolate that out and say, okay, 30 years from now, what does that look like? How does that impact society? What does the economy look like? What's the environment look like? You create that future world, and then you design concepts, products, services within that space. And you can design strategies to get you there along the way. But essentially, you're taking that future concept and then backcasting into the roadmaps of teams that are launching in that 30-year time span, theoretically. But oftentimes that 30-year out North Star vision is so far out that it's fungible, right? It has to be movable, because between today and 30 years from now, technology will have changed so drastically that you need to be able to adapt quite quickly. So it's much more about having multiple strategies to arrive towards a North Star, rather than having a defined future state that you're marching everybody towards. Did that answer your question?
So how do in a way,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a little bit foggy, not being part of the process. But I mean, the curious part there, and I think probably the key is how to develop something real from that. How do you get to a product or service idea from a North Star far advanced project, maybe aiming at tech that's not still there, so it's not graspable, or is that not the goal at all?
Well, I think the goal is eventually to move organizations and design groups towards that North Star vision in the long term, with the understanding that it may never possibly be feasible, but that vision that you're designing assumes that the technology will be everyday, out of pocket kind of technology accessible in the future. Whereas today, it may not even be on market yet. It could be, in some research lab. It's just based on some emerging white paper that you read coming out of academia. So you created that future based on this technology that doesn't exist. So turning that into something real can take a lot of business investment over the years. You may have to create entire new organizations to support this type of emerging technology, totally new backend architecture to support the productization of a new device that may support that technology. So it's a long-term investment strategy, as well as the design is long-term and iterative. So you can have a North Star vision that gets broken up into very near-term deliverable future products, a year out, 2 years out, 5 years out, and iteratively work towards that longer term vision and try and nudge people to get there. The positive thing is that if everybody has that longer term vision in mind, then you have hope of getting there sometime. So it may not be like a one true reality, but as long as everybody can see that North Star, you can nudge people in that direction.
Yeah, so it's much more about creating a vision for a company and for the people working there, and to get them fired up on us to maybe embark into a certain direction. So this is much more about actually influencing management, leadership in the field. So what did you find, what was challenging there when you had to come up with, or actually getting people involved into the visions that you developed? So especially in influencing leaders in large organizations, what did you find challenging at that stage?
Yes, it's much more about design influence and building coalitions towards a vision. If you look at the large organizations, in particular, a lot of the times leadership is very interested in speed. They may have their own particular performance metrics that they're responsible for. So understanding which leader is kind of the pivotal decision maker is very important, but that's not the only thing you need to focus on, because one person in a ship that large can generally not make the change needed to get you to that longer term vision. So you need to look at that large scale decision maker within the organization, and then look at the rest of the organizational structure as if you're looking at, the wireframes of a website. Who is consuming the products coming out of that leader? They generally probably report to somebody, unless you're talking about the CEO, but that doesn't sound like a large organization. So they generally probably report to somebody. They have people reporting into them. You need to understand who the upstream and downstream people are that you need to influence, so that you have kind of a multi-pronged approach to that main decision maker. And all of these people will eventually, if your influence campaign works, they will eventually be, nudging the same kind of ideas, notions, concepts to that key decision maker that you're trying to push in your design strategy. So there's a lot of public speaking involved within your large scale organization. You want to give a lot of talks. You want to share a lot of takeaways and simplified frameworks that other design teams can leverage in order to apply your big scale, longer term idea. Generally, those concepts that are far out in the future need to be simplified and broken down into a framework that teams can leverage and eventually build up towards your big idea. So those kinds of strategies are key.
Was there a special thing, an approach, a method, visualization, whatever, that you find was really key in winning people over, especially from communicating from a design position to another role?
Yes. Yeah. I think for myself, the most successful process for me has been looking at that far field theoretical technology and then forcing myself to apply a use case from today, grounded in today's technology, into that future. It's quite difficult because you're assuming a technology that doesn't exist. But if you force yourself to put a use case that you can think of today and conjure through that technology and map it out as if you would any other concept, these are the user scenarios, these are the scenes and the touch points, these are when the customer interacts with the device, and you map out that flow as much as you can as if it's going to production, that forces you to then simplify that theoretical technology into something grounded today that your other partner teams can consume. and eventually build towards that bigger technology. So I think making simplified frameworks is probably the best thing that you can do, the most powerful thing that you can do for that far field technology. Those takeaways are really important for partners.
Right. Sounds absolutely credible and absolutely graspable. Make it as small and easy as possible to understand. And from the first understanding, build on more complexity, maybe more layers, levels that there are behind the concept. Of course, so many ways in which it could evolve depending on the different goals, right?
Yes,
I'm wondering, was the one? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. One other aspect of that, when you're forcing yourself through that exercise of bringing a future technology through a modern day use case, you'll find, UX recommendations for today's systems, the technologies that you forced yourself to use, which then can be broken off and provided to your partner teams as strategic goals for their near-term roadmap. So not only are you feeding your design partners around you with a framework that works for them to design for that future, but you're also giving the technology teams and product teams goals that can actually build out that technology and backend and infrastructure.
Right. I'm wondering if you can share an example with us. Was there an instance in which a concept that you were really, really sure about and proud of was completely misunderstood? Or maybe there were loads, I don't know. And why was it? What can go wrong there?
There's, I think in futures design, I would expect most of the work to be misunderstood. So there's a lot of examples, and a lot of them don't launch for good reason, because I might be really jazzed about an idea, and then it turns out there's no path to monetization, for example, or the technology really is infeasible. And it is just theory. It's great for science fiction, but not necessarily for production. So there's a number of things. I think one of my most recent explorations that really was initially misunderstood until I started to unpack it was exploring brain-computing interface futures. I think just the mention of brain-computing interface futures scares the audience. Because you imagine invasive technologies like Neuralink and implants. But when you actually start to look at the research around brain-computing interfaces, the brain actually extends throughout the body and sends signals throughout your physiology in ways that are picked up by everyday devices we already use, like a Fitbit or your Apple Watch. Those technically have sensors that are acting as brain-computing interfaces. So if you have this concept initially, can sound quite complex and scary, but when you actually do some deeper research into the sensors, the hardware, how people are interfacing with these near-term versions of the product now, you can build these accessible stepping stones to the larger concept when you do a presentation for the far-term concept. So that was a good learning. You want to make it as accessible as possible and not a big scary idea.
Yeah, and talking about scary, there is a lot of hesitations about AI. Very lately, generative AI sprung up, ChatGPT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So people in general know very little about the facts about AI, and it's a vast field. It's an extremely big field.
Yeah.
And there is reason to be hesitant because it's being developed very quickly outside of public view, within private companies mostly. There's very little regulation, very little information about what's going on, also because it's so complex. And when things get dropped, they sometimes get dropped very quickly, and we're wowed, we're surprised, but then of course a lot of things go wrong as they are tested on the run, and people become even more unsure. But I think you have a bit more of an optimistic outlook into what technology and especially artificial intelligence can bring us. So maybe can you share a few ideas about that?
I do. Yes, I do. I share the concerns of a lot of people about the regulation of AI and the safety issues, the bias that gets introduced in the products that are launched very quickly. But I do feel quite optimistic because the technology itself is benign for the most part until us humans imbue it with the capabilities to do something unethical. So when it comes to your design and development process, the ethics around AI is a massive topic that people should all be diving into. But my hope and experience with these technologies, especially the generative AI, is that it's having a massive impact on the future forward concept design space, because now you can generate these materials that did not exist yet, or they don't exist yet. And it might have taken you a lot of specialists a lot of time to create these kinds of artifacts. So the generative AI is really helpful for those kinds of mythical things. And as long as you're not prompting it to do something that may not be considered ethical, then it could be quite fine to be using these technologies in your design process. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, is there any difference when you work in an AI as a designer? Is it different to design for AI than, let's say, for a product or service that's meant to be rolled out in the next future based on technologies we all know how to apply and use? What's difference there actually in a design process and design development?
Yes. Yeah. I think in both machine learning and AI driven experiences, the majority of your design effort may be spent on designing for failure and how to handle all of that failure. Because with machine learning and AI, the data that these devices or machines have to use is extremely noisy, and they can't necessarily focus their attention in ways that a human being can and get precisely to the point and understand what the customer and the device are supposed to be focusing on. So you need to be able to handle all the different ways in which this device can go wrong by focusing on the wrong thing or not returning the correct data. There's a lot of accuracy and precision problems. So when you're working on a customer flow or a customer journey, it's extremely nonlinear. There's going to be tons of variations, and you're going to spend a lot of your time on those variations as opposed to the happy path. The happy path is almost the easiest part of the journey. Once you've got that down, then you're spending most of your time trying to figure out all the ways it fails and how to handle that nicely and bring people back to the happy path.
How can you design for failure if it's still a very open technology, or the outcome, the output is still not graspable?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm thinking back to my own personal experience, and the best ways that I've been able to do that is to develop extremely healthy partnerships with my engineering partners. At some point, design theory and pushing things out into the future will go so far, but you actually need the hard data and performance constraints to understand where devices can fail, where sensor problems can occur, where the data is just not there to be accurate or precise. And if you don't have a good relationship with your engineering partners or your product partners, you're not going to be able to discover all of that up front in your design process, and you'll be racing to try and fix it after launch, for example. So I purposefully try to identify the different engineering, hardware architecture, software development partners that are responsible for different aspects of a journey once I have that mapped out. So if I have my happy path, I know maybe this cohort of engineers are responsible for the front part of this path. And then there's a second cohort of engineers that are responsible for this middle section. And then there's a possible interaction with this one sensor that's this other team over here. I go and interview each of those teams to identify what they're worried about in terms of what could possibly fail, and then to understand the functionality of their system as much as possible, so that in my master diagram of a customer flow, I can inject all of those possible points of failure and then map out the nonlinear flow through all of those points so that I can keep bringing stuff back up to the happy path when it fails. You can always bring people back to the happy path. Or if you can't, you gotta handle it gracefully, because that's what makes a good product.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, that makes it graspable. So it's about actually developing a user journey, a customer journey, but in addition to this, with let's say an underlayer of technical, very high-end technical stuff that could go wrong, and the different diversions that then would be necessary to come back to a good user experience journey.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So you've been working in this field for a couple of years, many years now. And as you're saying, this field is changing, and you've maybe touched upon a few items on this from your own experience. But when you look a little bit into the future and thinking about how design will change and the design field will change, so what do you believe, which kind of skill sets or fields of knowledge will designers need to develop?
Yes. This question actually reminds me of a discussion I was having with another design leader at one point, and I believe they were pushing back on a critique I gave of some work, and they said, designers don't need to understand machine learning and how it works in order to design for it. And I probably should have disagreed more strongly at that point, because I think that skill set is going to be crucial in the future. If you're designing for these technologies and you don't understand how they work, you could introduce more negative impacts than you're introducing positive impacts on your customer base, not to mention, the broader society as things play out long term. So I think having a general understanding as a designer of how machine learning works, how artificial intelligence layers on top of machine learning, these things are going to become increasingly more important, because that technology is getting smaller, more agile, more compact, and injected into more everyday objects. So as we progress on and these things become cheaper to produce, and objects become imbued with intelligence in a way that we haven't seen previously, designers need to know how machine learning works, what the process is, data cleanliness, regression. These big sounding concepts can actually be broken down quite well. They're getting much more accessible as well. There's a lot of free online training for clickable, spin up your own machine learning training, things like that. So designers should really be thinking about those skill sets for sure.
And are these skill sets that you learned on the job, or is it something that you took extra training for? Is it something that
Yes.
people can expect, depending, of course, on the field they're working in, on the company they're working for, to actually take on while they work?
Yeah, I've taken external training on my own curiosity, because I had done a lot of internal training. I went through the Amazon machine learning certification internally. I started working with the technology in my first UX internship early on. And thankfully, my computer security and telephony, my background with hacking around on computers in high school really helped me communicate with my engineers early on. So I've been following the technology kind of from its infancy into modern day. So maybe it's been a little easier for me. But there are internal trainings and external trainings that people should consider, both of them. I supplemented my internal trainings with external trainings because I wanted to know the different infrastructures that were involved. I didn't want to just know like the Amazon cloud kind of based tools and the Amazon approach to machine learning and AI. I wanted to understand some of the external stuff. So yeah, internal and external training is super helpful. On the job training is great. Being curious and talking to your engineering partners about it. Generally you find, the really great and curious engineering partners want to talk to you about this. They're so excited when designers want to get involved in the process and understand it more. And there's definitely touch points where design can start informing the data collection process for data scientists, the use cases up front, so they have they save time in their own process. So partnering with them is extremely important, and you'll learn a lot.
And if you think about your work field that you're involved in now, and you look a little bit forward to the future, how do you think it will change? Is there maybe something that will disappear or will appear?
Yeah, I'm actually watching. I think we have a lot of AI experiences now that are slowly on the march towards what people are referring to as artificial general intelligence. So this idea of a general purpose learning machine that can kind of wander around through space and learn new things on the fly. And we don't have that kind of AI now. It's very hard to produce those kinds of machines. We're definitely not there. The neural network technology that most people launch into devices today is too constrained by some old approaches to architecture and to just the hardware, software in general. But I'm very excited to see where the future of continuous learning is going. So machines can learn new models on the fly as they move around through space. Mobility of these machines in general is going to be incredibly important. And fusion sensors, so machines can integrate different senses simultaneously in a moment of understanding. For us humans, it's very easy. I can smell and see things at the same time and put two and two together and say that's a strawberry. But for a machine, it's really hard to do that. Right now, computer vision may be completely separate from some kind of olfactory sensor or a smell, right? They can't put those two things together. But with fusion models, they can start doing that. So those are some interesting things happening in the future. But long story short, this slow march to artificial general intelligence, I think, makes things like natural language understanding or like AI assistants, for example, very limited. They can only do so much. They're constrained by the devices that they embody. Alexa, for example, is looking at the world through a tiny straw, one little camera, can't move around, is very limited in what it can learn about the customer and what it can help the customer with. So I think those things will slowly be absorbed into more mobile products, things more similar to consumer robotic solutions. I think I triggered my Alexa device once. I'm sorry. Alexa, stop.
There you go. This is about the limited possibilities that tech still has at the moment, and understanding what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Now, I was keen to know what you think. Right. Yeah, I'm wondering what you think. Looking at yourself in 5 years' time, would you see yourself there?
In 5 years' time, I hope to be working on the expanded future of some of my more recent focus areas. I've been doing a lot of strategy work in teachable AI and looking into those kinds of fusion model futures and things like that. I hope to be working in that space, but in a place that has a bigger positive impact on the rest of humanity. I think there's some interesting opportunities I'm exploring there. I'd like to continue my mentorship of the teams I work with. I naturally kind of end up in those positions. And it's really fulfilling to feel like you're making a difference. You're able to share your skill set with people, teach and learn in a position in the same space. That's nice. And then advancing the technology for good. That's always important.
And that's so important also for the design field, and thinking about ethics in design, and of course about yourself and the purpose of why you do your work and why you keep engaged and keep on learning and keep on curious. And of course, part of learning and giving and exchange is also being part of a jury. So it's great to have you also on the UX Design Awards jury. Again, I must say, after a few years, we had a small break. I'm wondering what you're looking forward to as being on a jury. Why did you agree to be there?
I think it's very similar to when I first joined. I'm looking forward to the diversity of thought in the submissions. You'll have a global audience that you reach, and the folks from all around the world submit great design. And being able to be exposed to that diversity, I think is super valuable, not only for me as a professional, but for the rest of the design space to be able to see how this competition plays out. I feel fortunate that I get to participate, and I really look forward to the jury discussions around the material as well.
Yeah, that's always the most interesting part and impactful part when everybody gets together and starts discussing and going back and forth about the solution and seeing pros and cons. And this actually is also your opportunity maybe to shout out towards future participants what you would like to see from them. I mean, in the sense of what you need to know to be able to judge a product or a service. What would you say? What you want them to transport?
Yeah, I think, there's a level of human consideration that you can imbue your design concept with in the way that you present your material. And sometimes it may be the injection of some humor that is extremely thoughtful, but it took you all of this research to get there. If you have an ability to convey that research, that would be great. Otherwise, the great hero reel can tell me that you did a lot of that research, or could have been kind of an epiphany moment. So showing some of your process would be excellent. It's not always just, the hero kind of material. I want to see some human-centered process for sure. Yeah,
that's great to know. And you'll be happy to know that people can upload the research processes and explain how they put research results into the product. So there is not only the possibility to do a short video, explain a product, but really to also show the work that's been done in the background, which is so key to make it viable and to make it work well.
Yeah,
a lot of reading sometimes, and but you'll enjoy it, I guess, hearing you speaking like that.
Yeah.
So Amber, just before we finish off, is there something that you'd like to share with us? I mean, what inspires you at the moment? You're now in Arizona, maybe having a break from the daily grind, designing and working in tech. So is there anything like books, films that really inspire you at the moment?
Yes. Yeah. I'm actually reading a book called 1,000 Brains, which is a new theory of intelligence. I'm looking at kind of the future and changes in AI technology. That, I think, is an incredible read for even folks who aren't necessarily technically minded. It'll help you think about where the future of that technology is going as a designer, if people want to pick that one up. It's a good book. It's a couple years old at this point, but that's how I wake up in the mornings with my coffee right now. It's a good one. And along those lines, I'd love to make 2 more book recommendations that I think are super inspiring in this space for strategic and future design and organizational strategy. I think Communicating the New is a book. I want to say it's Communicating the New: Methods to Shape and Accelerate Innovation. That will help you with design strategy methodology and presenting within your organization. And then a book that'll give you a little bit of a different perspective on design, possibly, is Things We Can Design for Non-Human Centered Worlds. That gives you some perspective into design fiction artifacts and the types of things you can design in those mythical futures and then bring back to your organization now to get them to really start thinking about this North Star experiences and devices and visions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this. We'll make sure to put the titles and the authors in the show notes. Well, Amber, actually, where can people find out more about you? Do you have a website? Are you on Twitter? What do you share? What you do? I do.
Yeah, I have a website, amberlundy.com. I bought that domain so long ago. I can't believe I got it still. Yeah, amberlundy.com has my material. You can find me on YouTube, and I think there's some more information through the UX Design Awards website as well.
There is. We'll make sure to show some more. So thank you so much for this great conversation and the insights you shared on such a early morning over in the US. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. It was great being here.
So I'm looking forward to seeing you on the jury soon, and looking forward to having your inputs and critique, of course, in the jury panel. And there will be a great group of people that you'll be happy to meet. So this is it for the first edition of UX Conversations. So thanks a lot for being with us, and of course for more interviews and more materials, just check out our website uxdesignawards.com, and of course you can follow us also on YouTube, LinkedIn, or social media. So until next time, take care and see you at one of our next events. Bye bye.